Yo, listen up.
We will not live in a two-dimensional world.
We won't go in one direction
or zig where we can zag.
We will walk through walls. We will take a look around us.
We will not be confined.
We believe in the path of least limits.
We won't be told how to view the world.
We will experience true freedom. We will not compromise.
We will live the game through our hands.
We will be in control of something.
We will change the system.
I could never imagine, in my wildest nightmares, have ever imagined the horrors that could plague even the most simple of life enjoyments. The darkness that could invade any world, whether it be real or fictional. It all started the day me and my girlfriend were talking about video games that we used to play while growing up. The games that we used to enjoy over the years of my childhood. I've collected several games pertaining to several different consoles, but we both found the topic of Nintendo 64 to be the most fun. So, that day, we decided to pick up one from my uncle's video game store and perhaps even pick up one of the greatest Nintendo 64 titles ever. Super Mario 64. And when we got there, it took some time and a lot of browsing, but we were able to find the game after an hour or so in several bins he had placed throughout the store. The only copy had it appeared. As well as that, we had found a Nintendo 64 and the very last one that he had in stock, ironically. And the best part about it was, he gave it to us for free. He had told me that it had been bought and returned nearly 15 times since it had came into his possession, and now he was just looking for a way to get rid of it. So, he also told me that, ironically, the game was always returned with it as well, as they always seemed to be bought together. He had always heard that something was wrong with one or the other, and that some people even went as far as to tell him that they were evil, and that they were made in hell and some things like that. Seeing as how he only heard the story from 3 out of 15 customers, I brushed it off and as some hysterical story told by people who decided they simply didn't want to keep the system, an excuse, if you will, and gave him $20 for Super Mario 64. Cheap jerk gave me Nintendo 64 for free, though. We went back home after being gone for about an hour and a half, and when I got home, I laid the system in my living room, and the TV started to rummage through old boxes where I kept all sorts of old games, ranging from classic Atari games to ever-popular Dreamcast. It was actually sort of strange, because in these boxes I found that I owned every major console except for a Nintendo 64. Well, until now anyways. I pulled out my box with all my Nintendo 64 games in it and began to dig through it. I found games like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, as well as its sequel Majora's Mask, and 2 Castlevania titles for the system itself. Castlevania 64, Legacy of Darkness, and so on. Then it was time to hook it up. After everything was set up, my girlfriend decided that she wanted to put in Super Mario 64 first. And after some effort, the game was ready to go.
It's me, Mario!
It called out in its upbeat pitch. My girlfriend decided to mess with Mario's face for a bit, and finally pressing start on her purple controller and the screen. The screen translated to the file select screen. There were some files already on the game. In fact, all 4 slots were filled, each having just started the game because there were no stars in any file. So we started deleting them. After we deleted file 1, the game froze, and there was a deafening screech coming from our TV speakers, and it sounded almost as if someone was screaming from the game itself. My girlfriend turned off the system after about 5 seconds. After a moment or so, she flipped it back on and we went back to the file select screen. Strangely enough, the file that we had deleted on file 1 was back. And this time, it had six stars on it, even though previously it had none. So once more she deleted it again, And once again, it made a loud screeching sound. This time I would swear to God that it was louder than before, to the point where we both fell back while covering our ears as well. As I was closer to the plug than the system itself, I jerked it out of the wall. This time, before we bothered trying, I took the game out of the system and took it into the kitchen. It turned out that it was really dusty, which explained at the least to me why the game was reacting the way it was. Although it was still weird after cleaning it with a Q-tip, I took it back into the living room. I handed it to her. She plugged the console back into the wall, and we were ready to go. By now, it was getting dark out. There was no light in the room, and we couldn't plug in our lamp because the TV system was obviously hooked up to the outlet, so we were forced to play in the dark. For me, something didn't feel right, because for some reason I filled with this sense of nervousness that I could not quite explain. However, I shook it off and turned on the system. When we were back to the file select screen, each file that were there was previously gone. Oddly enough, which to me confirmed my suspicion that it was just a dirty game messing up. So we started a new game on file 1, and the screen lagged like it were a CD or something. But after about a minute, it started up normally. We got the opening screen with Peach inviting Mario to the castle, and the camera, as usual, followed up with the pathway to a giant green pipe which Mario leaped out of. She was in control of the game and took Mario directly to the castle. When she opened the door to the castle, there was a prolonged pause which made me nervous. Once again, the loud screeching that ruined our game previously shot through our ears, and it felt like glass was jabbed into our eardrums. We were both overwhelmed because of the terrible screaming and could not even think to reach the system to the plug. After about 30 seconds, it stopped, and we looked up to the TV, and Mario had somehow found his way into the Big Boo's haunt. As the mansion that had never appeared this creepy when I used to play it, it loomed over Mario's head ominously. What the hell? I said as I regained myself. My girlfriend was still getting herself together, and it took her a minute to process what was going on. I took the controller now and took a good look at the mansion itself. It was nothing like what it was supposed to be. It had castle-like features, and actually, it was covered totally in what I could only describe as blood, in rust. The sky had black and red colors about it, complemented by black clouds that seemed to pass by in an instant. I noticed that a new tower was now coming out of the mansion, and upon getting a good look at it, I noticed several figures hanging from it. The whole screen faded to white, like it does in an entrance room when you look up at the skylight and go to the world that you obtained the wing cap in. When Mario reappeared, he had somehow made it onto the top on a platform that went all the way around. The sky had a gloomy look to it as each cloud passed over the tower, as dark as the night sky, and the lightning began to rule the sky and illuminate the clouds in its thunderous wake. I tried for the first time to move Mario forward, but a bolt of lightning stopped any movement that I was willing to make at the movement. I dropped the controller and my heart began to race. I didn't know what to expect, and I could see by the look in my girlfriend's eyes that a strong sense of paranoia had overcome her, because I constantly noticed her looking back behind us in the shadows that covered the room. With hesitation, I took the controller in hand and moved Mario forward. About a foot or so before, something fell from the top of the screen, and the camera zoomed in on it. It was a depiction of Mario with a noose around his neck. We both fell back and dropped the controller on the floor. I moved back as quickly as possible, and Mario's clothes were ripped all over, exposing several parts of his body underneath, and the clothes we could make out were stab wounds from either a knife or a dagger, which more than likely caused a blood splatter all over his skin and remaining clothing. and his remaining clothing. But the most grotesque part of the image were his eyelids and mouth. They were sewn shut with blood trickling down his cheeks and chin. I was appalled at the gruesomeness, at the gruesome sight. My heart was racing, and I would swear to this day, at the moment the dead Mario fell from the top of the screen, that I heard something run into my bedroom. All of the hung figures were of Mario, all of the exact same, with eyelids and mouths sewn shut and stab wounds all over their bodies. I worked up all the courage I could muster, and I again unplugged the Nintendo 64, which turned off. But not at the instant. Before the TV screen went black, hung Mario's face underneath his sewn lips was smirking at us. I didn't want to get up, not even to turn on the lights. I wanted to remain in the exact spot, sitting down, because at least there I felt somewhat safe. But for my girlfriend's sake, I plugged the lamp in and lit the room up. Everything was peaceful, perhaps calm after the storm, and I took a deep breath and sat back down. I couldn't get that image out of my head, that smirk. I felt powerless as to what my mind wanted to remain on. I sat on the floor next to my girlfriend and hugged her and picked her up and took her to the bed. Who in the hell could possibly make that game? And who would, honest to God, make it like that? It had to be the game. It had to be, I don't know, maybe hacked? It's the only thing that made any sense to me. It's the only thing that, honest to God, made sense. What I saw in that game, I would define as, I guess, evil in its sickest form. Without a word between us, we laid in the bed for what felt like hours before one of us finally broke the silence. She told me that she wanted to get rid of the game, as soon as possible too. As it was already late, I decided that it would be best if we wait until tomorrow, because I was sure that my uncle's store was closed and GameStop doesn't take games that were that old. So we stayed in bed and agreed that we would not play that game again. But unfortunately, I couldn't get it out of my head. In fact, I still wanted to know why or how this was done. And unfortunately, my curiosity got the better of me. And in the end, after she had fallen asleep, I quietly got out of bed and went back into the living room. I plugged in the Nintendo 64, and it didn't turn on. It didn't have to. The game started itself. The fucking game turned on by itself. I don't know how. And not only that, but it picked up exactly where it had left off. I was astounded by this because I had never seen a Nintendo 64 do anything like that. Right then and there, I knew that there was more to this than I knew, and I had to know what I was fascinated, drawn perhaps. I got a good look around the tower. Despite being disgusted, I was morbidly fascinated by the entire scene. The paranoia it could convey was intriguing. After a few minutes of looking around, I pressed the pause button, and again the screen faded, this time to black. It took me all the way back to the file select screen, and I found myself with more questions than answers. All the files were back again, and file 1 had 6 stars, while file 2, 3, and 4 had none. I tried to remember back to when we picked the file, and I was certain that they were not there before. I tried loading file 4 first, and in response, the game showed me a picture of Mario dead in a pool of his own blood, and his eyeballs and entrails hanging out. After a shudder, it allowed me to hit B and go back. I tried loading file 3, and again I got another appalling picture of Mario once again staring directly into the screen with bloodshot eyes that looked so close that it seemed real. I really thought that they were. His mouth was gaping open, and his tongue was fucking missing. Well, it was missing from his mouth, at least. examined further and realized that Mario's tongue was wrapped around his fucking throat, and that he was being strangled with it. I heard a chuckle of sorts, and not from the game, but it sounded like it was directly behind me. Unfortunately, I ignored it against my better judgment. I tried to start up file 2 now, and a video began to play. Mario was strapped down on a table in a decrepit version of Castle's entrance hall. The stones were all black, blood oozing from the cracks between each of them. Curtains that hung from the ceiling were tattered and falling apart. They appeared to be worn with the years, and in the background, Peach and Toadstool were strapped to sides of the... They were strapped to both sides of the door that led into the basement area. Toadstool had the one... Toadstool had the mushroom on his head torn off. I could make out his fucking skull showing through the still fresh wound. He was obviously dead. Peach sent me into a state of awe. Her skin was peeled off, and all I could see fully formed was her head, which remained untouched. Jesus Christ, I said silently as the video continued. Mario struggled for freedom as the door upstairs opened, and a black mass slowly came through. Its footsteps slowly. His footsteps just echoed through the silent hall. The curtains on the ceiling blew casually to its passing as it moved down the steps towards him. Mario pulled and pulled, but found no way to escape the situation that he had found himself in. And in response, he began to beg for his damn life and pray. The black mass inched ever so closely to the hero. It seemed as though Mario gave up. The black mask walked around the table and stopped directly in front of Mario again. The hero begged, pleaded for his life. He told the black mask that he would do anything, only spare him for any crime that he committed against him. I saw a damn tear roll down Mario's cheek, and he closed his eyes tightly, and then a fucking rope tied around his neck. He gagged and took in only heavy breaths. I couldn't see a hand so much as touch the rope, or where it even came from. But it was indeed there, with just enough slack so that Mario could breathe. Deep cuts. Deep labrication cuts through Mario's clothes, and blood by gallons covered is in... Damn it. He was in some sort of pool. He was in a crimson pool of his own blood, and he screamed and begged and pleaded and asked for death. But it was not given to him. Not yet, anyways. The cuts continued until the floor was covered in dark red liquid, executing slowly to the floor. Finally, the swipes and stabs ceased altogether, and there was a deep silence that only Mario's gasp of misery filled. Before I could so much as think on what I had just seen, his eyes and mouth were forced shut, and I could see it for myself. A black needle going through both of his eyelids and mouth, simultaneously, effectively silencing him. Other than his muffled screams, even more blood came from his flesh wounds and covered up his face. The rope tightened around Mario's neck, although he made no effort to escape. It was over. After a few short grunts, Mario was silent altogether, with not so much as a breath or movement. His face was personified, and even though this is a video game, the pain one would have to endure, the torture. My God, again! Before the screen faded to black, that Mario smirked at me. I sat in silence, and the title screen with Mario's head came up on the screen, only it wasn't the same Mario. The background was all black, and the Mario was the same Mario from the scene that I had just watched. He had that smirk still on. After much debate, I decided to keep going. I went to the file select screen, and with all the courage that my heart could muster, I loaded file 1, 6 stars. The game loaded to a demonic laugh and a black sky filled with blood-red clouds. Repeatedly, I could hear a dark, brooding voice saying, like Mario would after you lost all your lives. The Mario that I was controlling was the same Mario that I had seen killed on the title select screen. Screams, tormented bodies littered the pathway of the castle. The bodies of Peach, several toadstools, and at the end, a dead Bowser, whose head was missing and whose body was impaled on a pike right outside of the bridge. I entered the castle and found myself back into Big Boo's haunt. I didn't question it anymore. I just went with it. The scene had not changed, not even slightly. And ignoring all the graphic details, I entered the mansion to what I was sure would strike my heart in some way, shape, or form. I could feel something circling and enclosing around me. I ignored it. I had to. I needed to know what was there. Or in some way, what was going on. Something whispered in my ear. I was sure of it. I gulped it as the screen translated to the entrance hall of Big Boo's haunt. The room with all the doors and bodies of faceless Marios were hung all over the ceiling, illuminated by only torches. I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck as I saw and a standalone figure all the way of the upper balcony. I moved Mario slowly towards it. I was afraid. I'm more than willing to admit that, and have never been more afraid in my life. I jumped up those steps, one at a time, moving cautiously and carefully. It was another hung man, that was certain, but who it was, I'll never forget. As I reached the body, I hesitated, but zoomed in on it, and I began to tremble, my hands barely holding the controller. The figure was indeed a man, hung by a rope. That man had his eyes sewn shut, as well as his mouth, just like Mario, and he was bleeding profusely from his eye sockets. That man, and all of his pain, was me. It was me. He let out a scream. Something haunting and bone-chilling. A wail like nothing that I had ever heard. The screen began to flicker and turn to static. I tried to turn off the system. I tried to unplug it, and nothing worked. The TV wouldn't even turn off. I saw my corpse through the static, burning as its haunting wail had yet to cease. Mario turned his head 180 degrees and looked at the screen. And with a smirk on his face, he let out a wail just like I did. My head began to hurt, throb. I fell to the floor, and the last thing that I remember from that night was seeing a black mask hovering over me.